Alk, continuing with the people have been asked to debunk in this COVID-19 saga, this name was put forward and has popped up a few times before on the forum. Michael Yeadon. So me first question is, who the hell is Michael Yeadon? My name is Michael Yeadon. Oh, you Michael Yeadon. My original training was a first-class honors degree in biochemistry and toxicology. Long story short, he's a pharmacologist and a former executive advisor. So let's get to the point. What's he claiming and what's his source? Sage took the view that since SARS-CoV-2 was a, quote, new virus, that they believe there wouldn't be any immunity at all in the population. Unfortunately, Yeadon gives no source for this claim. He just says he remembers hearing it. Whenever someone refuses to give a source, it's a good sign that either they don't want people to check what they re-saying or they've got a fuzzy memory and haven't checked to see if they remembered correctly. It's always very quick and easy to check someone's source and show that they've, let's call it, made a mistake. When no source is given, then you have to spend time and effort trawling through documents, trying to find the evidence for their claim. If it doesn't exist, that could take forever. In this case, Yeadon's comment about Sage made no sense. After all, throughout history there have always been people with natural immunity during any pandemic. It would seem strange for epidemiologists to deny this. And of course they didn't. Sage stated quite clearly that there would be people immune to the virus. They even modeled how many people would have that natural resistance. Perhaps what Yeadon misunderstood was that Sage said there wouldn't be enough of these people to stop the spread of the virus effectively, in other words, herd immunity. And he got this wrong too. You don't need masks, they don't work. Forget lockdowns, they never slow transmission. Once again, Yeadon gives no sources for these two claims. The only way to know whether masks and lockdowns work is to do proper clinical and epidemiological studies, then have them peer-reviewed and published so that other researchers can respond, comment, confirm or disprove them. Yeadon hasn't done any of that. He's just made a proclamation, which is how religions work. But this time it's easy to cite the scientific studies because I already did my homework when I made a couple of videos on these subjects last year. Here I showed studies that found masks are not very effective in protecting the wearer if they are handled incorrectly and not accompanied by frequent hand washing, but they are effective in preventing the wearer from spreading an infection to others. I showed this quite graphically in my video. Masks are even more effective in preventing infected people from spreading the virus. This test shows droplets, they were visible in green, emanating from someone just talking without a mask. Stay healthy. But wearing a mask stops that completely. Stay healthy. Louder. Stay healthy. I've also shown studies which all confirm the effectiveness of lockdowns in slowing the spread of infection, regardless of whether you think lockdowns are socially, legally, or ethically acceptable. But the most commonplace Yeadon's name came up was this claim that COVID vaccine is female sterilization. Firstly, did he really say that? And if he did, based on what? To find out, of course, we have to follow the source trail. No, not the source trail, the source trail. This Facebook image being passed around has the source written right there. It's a reprint of this blog called Health and Money News. The vaccine contains a spike protein called syncytin-1, vital for the formation of human placentae in women. If the vaccine works so that we form an immune response against the spike protein, we are also training the female body to attack syncytin-1, which could lead to infertility in women. And what's the source for this claim? No prizes for guessing. It's not a peer-reviewed study published in a respected scientific journal. It's a petition. Unlike a peer-reviewed study, anyone can write a petition. I could write a petition claiming that vaccines cause your arm to be magnetized. Before you say, come on, no one would be stupid enough to believe that. They all seen that move. And there it is. Come closer. Sicken to me arm. So did the petition say the vaccine is female sterilization? No, not even Yeadon would make that claim because there's no evidence for it at all. What Yeadon and his co-petitioner Vcodec did was cobble together a few bits of information that invited speculation. Several vaccine candidates are expected to induce the formation of humoral antibodies against the spike proteins of SARS-CoV-2. Hold on, let's put that into simple English and break the claim down. Yeadon says antibodies are trained to attack the spike protein, the business end of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The spike protein contains a homologous form of syncytin-1. We'll see what that means in a minute. Syncytin-1 is also present in women to make the placenta during pregnancy. So the antibodies may attack syncytin-1. And if they do, the placenta can't be formed. Result: sterile women. Experts who work in the field of virology and immunology say his theory is complete nonsense. Firstly, syncytin-1 and the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein are completely different proteins. They have different sizes, different shapes, and different functions, just like two different buildings. Immunologists say that it's ridiculous to suggest that antibodies can't tell the difference. But what about Yeadon's argument that the spike protein contains a homologous form of syncytin-1? Well, that sounds impressive, but what it boils down to is that every short amino acid chain in the spike protein is the same as every short amino acid chain in syncytin-1. Immunologists say antibodies aren't going to confuse the two, because it's a bit like saying that I might confuse this house with this house because they share the same type of Greek pediment in the middle. If there were a few overactive B cells that would attack human proteins on the basis of a few identical amino acids, the body has a way of deselecting them. It's called negative selection. If the body didn't have that function, then not only the immune response to SARS-CoV-2 vaccines would trigger an attack on our own proteins, so would every other immune response. That would pretty much make every woman on Earth infertile. Since we all here, I guess that hasn't happened. And there's more. Not only is this small sequence of amino acids in the spike protein unlikely to be mistaken for syncytin-1, experts point out that the antibodies don't even attack that part of the spike protein anyway. So the door to the smaller house might be in the front, but the door to get into the bigger house is in a completely different location. But the biggest problem for Yeadon's claim isn't that it doesn't stack up on a theoretical level. He's been disproved on a practical level too. After all, lots of women caught SARS-CoV-2 and then became pregnant, or they caught the virus in the early stages of pregnancy. Studies show no evidence that antibodies were blocking the formation of their placentas. Their chances of miscarriage were the same as women who didn't have such antibodies. There are also studies looking at women who were vaccinated, and again no evidence that their chances of miscarriage or infertility were any worse than women who weren't vaccinated. Two scientists who've done extensive research in this field analyzed serum from women with COVID-19 and didn't find any reaction between patients, antibodies, and syncytin-1. And this study not only confirmed no similarity between the amino acid sequences of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and syncytin-1, but also showed no reaction with syncytin-1 at all when it did an analysis of convalescent serum from patients with COVID-19. In fact, This study even found that a lot of vaccinated women became pregnant while participating in clinical trials, even though they were told not to get pregnant during the trial, so you could argue that the vaccine increased fertility. I'm kidding. God, please let's not start another myth. How many times and in how many different ways does this claim need to be busted? Even Yeadon and his co-author on the petition admit there's no evidence to support this speculation. There's no indication whether antibodies against spike proteins of SARS viruses would also act like anti-syncytin antibodies. However, if this were to be the case, which as the research has clearly shown, it isn't. Yeadon's speculation in the petition was so weak that even the bloggers didn't think it was up to scratch, so they had to embellish it. It's obviously not much of an argument to say that the two proteins share a short string of amino acids, so they changed that to the spike protein is called syncytin-1. In other words, they read the same thing. Much more convincing. And instead of there's no indication that antibodies would attack syncytin and cause infertility, that had to be changed to COVID vaccine is female sterilization. Much more definite. And that got passed around Facebook and Twitter. How easily these myths get started. Yeadon's petition and the blogs that misquoted it had a huge impact. According to this research paper, internet searches on the subject of the vaccine causing infertility were pretty flat until the petition was launched and the blogs were posted. Then the number of internet searches ballooned. While we read dealing with myths about the vaccine and sterilization, Health and Money News was also responsible for spreading another fanciful story headlined, "Designer of COVID vaccine admits vaccine will only sterilize 70 of the population," which doesn't make much sense. Why would the designer of a leading vaccine, Professor John Bell, go on television to publicly announce that it will sterilize only 70 of the population? Was he hoping for 100? Why is he admitting any kind of sterilization on national television? A more accurate quote is in the body of the article, but it still makes no sense. These vaccines are unlikely to completely sterilize a population. They are very likely to have an effect which works in a percentage, say 60 or 70. End quote. Believe him, someone who has these levels of credentials doesn't misspeak without correcting himself. The claim, of course, went viral on Facebook and Twitter, and as you'd expect, instead of being skeptical and checking the facts, people expressed outrage. He openly admits to population via sterilization. He actually doesn't even realize what he's just admitted to on Lived. So did Bell inadvertently blurt out a secret? Did he misspeak? Or is the blogger who runs Health and Money News an idiot? Answer: the blogger who runs Health and Money News is an idiot. Sterilization has several meanings, including the rendering of something free from viable microorganisms. So when a vaccine renders you free of a virus, that's called sterilization. If a vaccine renders 70 of the population free of a virus, then 70 of the population has been sterilized. It doesn't mean 70 of the population is unable to conceive children. Unless, of course, reproduction was the topic of conversation and not vaccines. There's only one way to find out. And that then tells you that you can look at the real vaccinated population and see whether they've been protected. So I am hoping that's going to happen pretty smartly this autumn. But then don't forget, these vaccines are unlikely to completely sterilize a population. They are very likely to have an effect which works in a percentage, say 60 or 70. We all have to look quite carefully, and the regulators will have to look quite carefully to make sure that it's done what we need it to do before it gets approved. So there will be a delay. So no, Bell wasn't talking about reproductive sterilization. He was talking about sterilization from the virus. After the myth began circulating, Bell explained this himself to a fact-checking website. I was referring to the ability of the vaccines to completely eliminate viral replication, i.e. sterilize, and it had no relevance to fertility. That's pretty obvious. But just to make sure, it's not Bell who's the idiot. I checked the scientific literature, and sure enough this is a commonly used term in virology and immunology. Finally, another doctor discovered by that font of urban myths, Natural News. Doctor refuses to accept patients who get vaccinated for COVID-19, reads the headline. Reads Why? Because he believes the myth started by Yeadon that the vaccines cause infertility. A physician who goes by the name of Drew Baker has published a video explaining that he will no longer be accepting patients who were vaccinated for the Wuhan coronavirus. Drew Baker does not want to risk the health and safety of his staff and patients by allowing the jabbed to be in close proximity to them. Wait, what? A doctor believes that if you get vaccinated you're not only going to become infertile yourself, you're somehow going to spread that infertility to anyone you sit or stand next to. I am sure Natural News must have measured. I have to take a stance in order to protect the people in me office. I am not willing to watch somebody who made a poor decision and got the shot stand next to a young female in me office and risk the chance of her becoming infertile. No, the physician who goes by the name of Drew Baker really does believe that. So what's the evidence for this? Let's talk about the size of a cell. You can't see it, right? If I were to pile up millions of them, they'd be like this big. Well, viruses are smaller than cells. Spike proteins. I don't know. Are they smaller than? Nobody knows. Oh, point of information. Of course they know this spike protein has been intensively studied. Researchers know exactly what it's made of, what it does, how it does it, and of course how big it is. But carry on. All I know is that when I ask the females in my office, they are all having, not all, 80 are having weird female cycles. Okay, this raises a lot of interesting and frankly rather disturbing points. Firstly, what's the evidence that these women are having weird cycles because they sat next to a patient who had been vaccinated? Secondly, 80 of what? How many women were involved in this study? In other words, how many work at your office? 5. And thirdly, what prompted you to start asking your female employees about their menstrual cycles anyway? I tried to do a similar survey of people I know, asking women who live near me and the woman who works at the bakery about their menstrual cycles, and they all reminded me that the restraining order is still in place. So who is the physician who goes by the name of Drew Baker? Well, on his website he describes himself as a professional speaker and an expert in healing. Okay, but does that mean you're a real doctor? If covering up symptoms with drugs and never actually fixing anything is what real doctors do, no, I'm not a real doctor. Well, by that definition, most doctors aren't real doctors. So here's what the physician who goes by the name of Drew Baker should have said. If spending 3 years in medical school and passing exams and then 2 years of internship and then residency and passing the licensing exam to practice medicine is what real doctors do, then no, I'm not a real doctor. Or to put it more succinctly, I'm not a real doctor. And yet Natural News calls him a physician and other blogs are quite happy to quote him, as if he is a real doctor. Which of course will impress a lot of people, but I never care about titles anyway. There were only 2 criteria for debunking crap on the internet. First, it has to be crap. Second, people believe it. There's a lot of difference between the physician who goes by the name of Drew Baker and Drew Yeadon in terms of their qualifications, but absolutely no difference in the way that both are spouting nonsense on the internet and people believe them. First-class honors degree. I know, and that sounds very impressive. Well, Ivy got a third-class honors degree and I came bottom of me class at school. It just goes to show that you don't have to be a dunce to post crap on the internet, and you don't have to be a genius to check sources and debunk it.